In today's ThinkScript tutorial, we're going to be building a smarter MACD indicator. This is a beginner-friendly ThinkScript tutorial, and it's a continuation in our MACD series. By the end of this video, you'll have an indicator that looks like this. There's a few key benefits that the smarter MACD will provide you compared to the built-in MACD indicator. Now, if you've ever used the MACD indicator, you know that it has a lot of different outputs. It has a histogram, it has two different lines, it also has a zero line. It can very easily get noisy on your chart, and it also has a lot of different settings for you to control. Instead, the smarter MACD indicator condenses all of that information into one simple, easy to read line, and will make that line either green or red to take that process of determining trend one step further. So the whole idea is take a lot of information and make it easy to read so that you can just make decisions a lot faster instead of being paralyzed by the data. Now, as we build this indicator, there's a few bells and whistles that we'll be adding. The first is higher time frame analysis. For whatever time frame you're on, we'll automatically detect what is a higher time frame and perform all of our calculations using that time frame's MACD. We'll do this via a process called mapping, which I'll talk about in just a second. If you've never built a multiple time frame indicator, this is a good introduction, a good stepping stone into that overall idea. Now, with our indicator, we'll also have two settings that we'll let the user control, and both of these settings are designed to help answer two key questions for the user. Lever is designed to help answer how reactive to price do you want to be. Would you like to be quick to react, or would you like to wait for price to stabilize a little bit more before you react? And the second setting is mode, which will help the user control how long they'd like to wait for a confirmation before seeing this switch within our trend color. Now, before we get to writing some code, let me quickly walk through the time frame mapping. Now, if you're on anything less than a 5-minute time frame chart, so either a 1-minute, a 2-minute, a 3-minute, or even a 4-minute chart, then we'll be using the 5-minute time frames MACD for all of our calculations. That's the highest time frame that we have available after for, say, something like a 1-minute time frame. Now, if you're using, say, a 5-minute time frame chart or a 10-minute time frame or anything less than a 15-minute, we'll be using the 15-minute MACD for all of our calculation. So we'll have our indicator go and reference that 15 minutes data and pull that data for whatever the calculation is on whatever time frame you're looking at. We'll automatically detect this in our code. So if you're, say, on a 15-minute, we'll use the 30-minute MACD. If you're on less than an hour, we'll use the hour MACD, and we'll scale this up all the way to the monthly time frame. So in this sense, the time frame that we're looking at will automatically be selected behind the scene, but it will be a higher time frame, and that will help make this line that you see on your chart a little bit more reliable and a little bit more accurate. Now let's move to Thinkorswim and start writing some code. Inside of Thinkorswim, I'm going to click the Studies icon, and here I'm going to search for MACD. I'll click the scroll icon to open up the built-in MACD's code, and let's copy and paste all of this code into a new file as our starting point. I've copied it, I'll click Create, delete everything we have inside, and replace it with the MACD code. Now at the top, I'll start by giving our new indicator a name, TI_smarter MACD, and we can delete all of the code we don't need, which is everything below the average line. We don't need any of that. We're going to be creating our own custom bells and whistles. Now, as of right now, we can also delete this input variable right here, but what we have are the value and the average line. We have our fast length, slow length, and MACD length, and the average type as the variables, and that is what outputs the MACD in its current state, which is just the two lines. Now we can use this as our starting point to modify the code, and the first thing I can think of is updating our close variables to, instead of using whatever the current time frame is, to use the higher time frame chart that we use as our mapping, the entire mapping strategy we just discussed. So to do that, I'm going to create some space here, and I'll create a new variable called def higher time frame, And inside of this variable, we can set whatever aggregation period, which is Thinkorswim's version of saying time frame, to whatever we need to based off of whatever time frame the user's currently on. Now to check what time frame they're on, we can use this function called getAggregationPeriod. So here, for example, I'll say if getAggregationPeriod is less than aggregationPeriod.5_minute. So here we're checking, hey, is the user on a chart that's less than the 5-minute time frame? Then we're going to set the aggregation period that we should be using, meaning the time frame, to the 5-minute chart. That was the mapping we said. So if you're using that 1, 2, 3, or 4-minute time frame chart, we want to use the 5-minute time frame for the calculation of these value and average variables. So let's go ahead and output that. So we'll say then aggregation period dot 5_minute. Now we can move on to our next time frame. So here I'll say else if get aggregation period this time is less than aggregation period dot 15-minute. So now we're checking, hey, are you on a 5-minute time frame chart, a 10-minute time frame chart? If so, then we're going to be using the 15-minute as the aggregation period that we use for the closing prices calculation for the value and average variables down here. Now you should notice this is a repeating pattern, so we can copy and paste this line right here with the else if, and we can paste it one more time and update this to our next time frame that we're checking in our mapping, which is the 30-minute time frame. After the 30-minute time frame, we have the hour time frame. So there I'll say hour and hour. And after the hour, we have the daily. And after the daily, we have the weekly, which is what the daily time frame would be using, meaning the weekly MACD or weekly closing price for the MACD calculation. And after week, we have month. And after this, we can add in our final else clause, which is our default if we're in none of these aggregation periods, which would mean we're greater than the monthly time frame aggregation period. Then we can say aggregation period.year is what you will default to. So here we have a variable that we've created called higher time frame, which is essentially performing all of the checks that we talked about in that mapping process. It starts by checking, hey, are you on a time frame chart that's less than the 5-minute? If so, use the 5-minute and we'll plug this variable into the closing price. If you're on something greater than the 5-minute, so maybe the 5-minute or the 10-minute time frame chart, then we're going to use the 15, and we're working our way down the line and defaulting finally to if you're greater than even the monthly time frame, or rather on the monthly, then we're going to be using the yearly aggregation period. Now let's feed this variable into our closing price by adding the parameter period to our closing price. And here we'll say our parameter is this higher time frame variable that we just created. We can repeat the same thing for the second close price. So I just copied and pasted it one more time. So we're saying for both of our closing prices, now use whatever that higher time frame variable is. So now if I click apply, you should notice these lines automatically change because currently the last time we clicked apply, we were using that 2-minute time frame. Now we're still using that 2-minute time frame, but we have this new logic, which is going to tell this indicator that, hey, you're using the 5-minute time frame for our MACD calculation. So let's see that switch happen in 3, 2, 1. And now you can see how that MACD line shifted. Now let's continue working our way down to some of the other bells and whistles that we can add. As of right now, we've completed introducing in the entire higher time frame portion. Now we need to add in the different levers that the user can control, and that is essentially making sense of these 3 input variables. So here, let's start by first creating our 2 new input variables, the lever and the mode. I'll start with the lever first. I'll say input lever is equal to, and we can give this a default value of fast, and we'll say the other values are slow and medium. And I'll close this out with the bracket. And I'm also going to create the mode variable right now while we're at it. And I'll say default for our mode is going to be that aggressive value, and the user will have the option to change it to conservative. And let me close this bracket out. Now, simply by creating these two variables, these two input variables with the brackets around it and this text, if I click apply and OK, and we double click our Smarter MACD study, you'll see we now have a lever and a mode added to our study's settings menu with the drop down with 2 different and 3 different settings for each of the 2 respective variables. Now we need to add in the actual logic, which changes something that happens in the code based off of whatever the user selects for each of these 2. Let's start with the lever first. Remember, we said that the lever should control how reactive to price do we want to be. So to control some of that, we can allow the user to change, say, the fast length, the slow length, along with what moving average type we use. So let's create a new set of variables designed specifically for this fast mode, slow mode, and medium, which changes these 3 inputs for the 3 respective settings. So I'm going to say here, fast length is going to be one variable, which this will change. Then we will have slow length, and then we will have average type. I'm going to delete these 3 variables for right now, or these 2 variables, excuse me, along with the average type variable down here. We'll leave the MACD length for the time being. Underneath the 3 def variables we just created, I'll add a switch. And inside of this switch, we'll feed that lever variable. And we'll open up this switch, and I'll add the closing bracket so I don't forget it. And we have 3 different cases that we need to account for: the fast, the slow, and the medium case. So I'll say case fast, and we'll fill it in just a second. Case slow, and case medium. Now, if we think about it, for our fast value, we would want that to be something faster than even that default 1226 that typically comes in for the fast and slow length. So here I might use my new favorite fast length, which is very quickly becoming that 3 and the 8. So I'll say our fast length is 3 and our slow length is 8. And our average type here is the same default average type dot exponential. These would be what we might call our default aggressive settings. And in fact, I've upped the sensitivity just a little bit by decreasing the fast and the slow length, so it's a little bit more adaptive. But remember, we have the higher time frame taking care of the portion of adjusting for these more aggressive settings. That's why I'm trying to have a fast setting, which allows me to be more aggressive on higher time frames while I'm looking at these smaller time frames. So I think this is a good set for what I would call fast. If that means something different for you, simply change these variables right here, or these numbers from 3 and 8 to whatever you'd like, along with the average type. Now we repeat a similar process for our slow variable. So here, I'll say fast length, and for our slow variable, I'll use the 10 and the 20 simple moving average instead of fast. I think that's a good proxy for slow. I don't want to use something super slow like the 50 or the 200. So I'll say average type is simple. And that means for our medium, we use something somewhere in between. So I'll say fast length is, let's use maybe the default here of fast length is 12, slow length is 26, and our average type continues to remain as exponential. Now that we have each of these values, they're automatically feeding in down here into value, but now our average type is going to change based off of whatever the user has selected for the lever. I'll click apply and OK. We can already see that the MACD is starting to change its form just a little bit. Now if I double click this and we change our lever from say fast to slow, you'll see how this line adjusts and changes. So we have our 3 different modes now created, which are simply just 3 different permutations of the fast length, the slow length, and the moving average type. So if I come back to fast on this 2-minute time frame, for example, the fast is using the 5-minute time frame charts calculation. It's using, since we used in the fast case, the 3 for the fast length, the 8 for the slow length, and our average type is being set to exponential for the MACD settings, and then it's outputting these 2 values. Now, we don't need to see both of these lines. In fact, I think the line that we would most likely want to see is if we were to say smooth out our line, that would probably make it a little bit easier to see. So if we were to, in fact, instead of commenting this out, if I change this to a def value, and now we see apply, this to me looks a little bit cleaner. The line is smoothed out. We are automatically applying an average on top, and we get just one line on our chart. Okay, so far we have our lever created. Now let's create that mode variable, which if you remember, the mode is designed to control how long should you be waiting for confirmation. So here, similar to how we created our switch variable for the lever, if we did something similar for our mode, but let's create a new length variable. So I'll say output length, since this is what's actually being plotted. And we're going to connect this to switch mode. Mode, sorry. And I'll open this up. And inside, let's account for the two different cases, aggressive and conservative. And we can connect our output length variable in the aggressive to the fast length that we've set up above. And for our conservative, we can connect the output length to the slow length instead. So it's a larger number. And we can use this output length as the length that we use when calculating the average. So instead of that default value of 9, now we're being a little bit more adaptive. We're taking whatever the user has selected for the lever, either the fast or the slow length is then being used for our mode. So now if we click apply, we can see how this MACD line is changing based off of whichever options I select. The value will change, and same thing with our lever. So as of this current moment, we have most of our logic in place, but this line is still somewhat difficult to read. If you see this line, it just looks like one big turquoise line. Now to make this more human readable, let's start by adjusting some of our values first. I'm going to change this average line to instead be called Smarter MACD, since that's ultimately going to be our plot. And we're going to need to reference that as we build out some of the color logic and other logic that just allows us to turn this line into something a little bit more useful. Now the first thing I'm going to do is create two new variables, an up switch and a down switch variable, which allows us to identify points like these when the transition happens from going from down to up, thus the name up switch and down switch. So for up switch, I'll say def up switch, and this is going to be if our smarter MACD line is greater than the smarter MACD value from the previous bar, then we're going to say this value is 1 or this variable is true. Else, if our smarter MACD variable is actually less than the value from the previous bar, then we're going to reset this variable to 0. So this is our way of making sure that this doesn't go infinitely as 1. And otherwise, we're going to carry forward this up switch value so that we know whatever the existing trend is. So that's how I'm defining the trend. We're checking, first of all, is our MACD increasing compared to the previous bar? And when we say smarter MACD here, this is the average line using all of the different levers and modes and higher time frames that we've already built. Now, if that switch has happened, we're going to carry forward this true value since the trend is bullish. As soon as that MACD stops increasing and starts to decrease compared to the previous bar, this variable will be set to 0, and we will essentially have reset this variable. If that doesn't happen, we're simply just carrying forward the true variable from when the MACD is increasing, since we're in that same existing uptrend. Now we repeat this for the down switch, where I'll say if smarter MACD is less than smarter MACD from the previous bar, then we're going to set this variable to true. Else, we're going to add in our reset clause, where else if the smarter MACD is greater than the smarter MACD from the previous bar, in this case, we'll reset this to 0. Else, we simply carry forward that down switch variable. Now we can plug this as colors. So if I say smarter MACD dot assign value color, I'll say if up switch, then color dot green. Else if down switch, then color dot red. Else we'll leave a default of color dot gray. Let's see what happens to this blue line. Hopefully it should be a little bit more readable. There we go. Now it's a lot easier to make sense of this information, to see when those trend switches are happening, and to see it defined in one clean, precise moment. One other thing I'm going to do is make this line just a little bit thicker. So I'll say smarter MACD dot set line weight, and instead of the default 1, I'll set this to 2, so this line is just a little thicker and easier to see. And there you have it. We've built our very own MACD indicator that's much smarter than the built-in default MACD, but very much based and built on the backbones of that indicator. Depending on whatever time frame you're on, the indicator will automatically adjust and give you a higher time frame chart's MACD and make sense of that MACD information. You have different levers that you can tweak and test based off of whatever your trading style is to find a setting that works for you and a MACD that fits for your trading style, whether it's day trading, swing trading, or anything in between. This indicator works on any time frame. You can even go up to the daily, we said the weekly, and even the monthly time frame if you'd like, and the indicator will keep adjusting, though on the monthly, seems like it won't be all that useful. The daily time frame is where I imagine most of you will be using it, and I think you'll find that testing these different levers will allow you to pinpoint some of these reversals in a manner that works for you and your trading style. If you simply use that COVID drop as an example here and take a look at where each of these 3 different settings would have given you that trend switch, if we start with that slow and aggressive setting, you get that switch taking place sometime in June. If you start with slow and conservative, that gets pushed out towards the end of June. If you, instead of slow, came back to fast and maybe aggressive, you'll see that came earlier in mid-March. And if you go from fast to conservative, that gets pushed out just a little bit towards the end of March. And same thing, if we come into medium and we go to aggressive, you'll be able to see middle grounds here between that May to June period. So these are ways to essentially tweak the settings to work for your particular trading style. Choose whatever works for you. Go back, study which markets you like to trade, and you can then stick with that without needing to fuss with other lengths, variables, things of that nature. I hope you found this tutorial useful in building your very own smarter MACD indicator. If you'd like to download the final version of this code, it's available for free on our website. The download link is in the description box below. Take care, everyone. Good luck trading, and I'll see you in our next update.